when you're trying to set up a rhyme for your song, um, I try really hard to not make it predictable, to to not make it where if I'm going to use the word night, to don't follow it with fight or might, or you're used to hearing that, right? If you set someone up where you start a line and because you end with night or whatever, and they think the next line is going to be like light or might or whatever, and you put in something else there, they're kind of like, oh, I didn't expect that. So, of course, with writing lyrics, what I just really try to do, as I said, I think that a lot of times the inspiration for me comes from, I mean, inspiration comes from different places. It's hard to say. There was a song that I wrote back in the Alliance days. It was probably one of the best songs I wrote during that era. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the album. It was on the second album that we didn't get finished. Is a song called Edgewise, and I that one really just came together. It's like it's totally about being in the friend zone. Except we didn't call it the friend zone back in the '90s, right?
Edgewise.
And the inspiration for that just came from literally I was in the music building at Arkansas State, and someone had a little comic strip hanging on their door, and it said something about getting a word in edgewise. And I sort of started thinking about that, and it sort of hit me. I thought, that is interesting that we have this word edgewise, and we almost never hear it except for in that phrase, you can't get a word in edgewise. And I thought, why not? That would be an interesting name for a song. So I ended up writing this whole song around just for that reason, right? Was where it came from. And so inspiration can come from anywhere, but a lot of times, like I said, for me, it'll come from when I'm starting the song. It will, well, I guess I should say this. Sometimes I'm singing the melody and some words just feel good. But I should say that sometimes, because I didn't say this earlier, but I should say this, sometimes when I hear a phrase like edgewise or whatever, sometimes I'll hear those words sung in a particular melody, right? I'll be inspired by hearing a word or a phrase or whatever. I'll get something stuck in my head and I start writing writing around that, right? And so, in just sort of singing those words, what feels good when singing those words, right? Of that 3 or 4 word phrase or whatever. So, and then everything kind of evolves from that.
You mean
so not
melodically what feels good?
Yeah. Just singing what melodically feels good to me, right? So, perfect example of this is that the song "No Thanks to You" on our album. This idea came back a long time ago. I had the song for years before I ever did anything with it. And I had kind of gone through kind of a little rough period in my life, and I finally got to a point where I was getting a better job, and some things were coming together. Things were starting to work out. Finally, I was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel after a few very rough months of my life. This was years ago, and I was leaving a friend's house, and I was just kind of feeling very hopeful, and the phrase kind of came to me of now my life is coming together. Now I finally found the way to make it all better. And that was kind of how that song started. I remember distinctly getting in the car at my friend's house, thinking of that line, and then the rest of the song sort of evolved.
It's a great little nugget of a lyric, and it sets up a really cool story, I think.
Exactly. So sometimes that will happen. But so it's kind of hard to say, where the inspiration comes from, because they come from all kinds of different places. And, sometimes I just hear phrases and go, well, that's cool. Sometimes kind of improvise something and it comes up. Sometimes maybe I'll read something, something will happen or whatever. So it's kind of hard to say where that comes from. But the one thing that I do try to do, I want to talk a little bit about rhyming of lyrics, because that is something that a lot of people get caught up on. And this is something you probably already know, but when you're trying to set up a rhyme for your song, I try really hard to not make it predictable, to not make it where if I'm going to use the word night, to don't follow it with fight or might, or you're used to hearing that, right? or or you would do and to or whatever. And I'm not going to say that I get away from that all the time. You're going to find examples of that here and there, right?
Look at the
But
Beatles.
yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
Simple
well,
stuff.
exactly. Well, Neil, one of my favorite songs of Neil is called June, right? And it's totally June came upon us too much too soon, then was gone like the mountains of the moon at dawn, And so very simple, very straightforward, but it's very powerful. So it can be effective, right? But if you do that every song, it's going to get, you're going to get to a point that you're going to feel like you're repeating yourself. And much like I was talking about with the variation of the song, if you set someone up where you start a line and because you end with night or whatever, and they think the next line is going to be like light or might or whatever, and you put in something else there, uh, they're kind of like, oh, I didn't expect that, right? And so what I try to do is that, and this is something you probably already know, but the important thing of the rhyme scheme is not really the word itself, but it's the vowel of the word. Okay. So for instance, we were talking about scenes from an Italian restaurant. Okay. So it has the line, Brent and Eddie were still going steady in the summer of 75 when they decided the wedding would be at the end of July. Okay. 75 and July do not rhyme, but it works. Right. Because it's the I sound. Summer of 75 and end of July. It works. Right. And that song is filled with those examples of that. Right. Because really, when you're listening to a song, if you're listening to words that have the same vowel sound, it's going to come across as that. And another example, Strawberry Fields Forever, the Beatles. Let me take you down because I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real. Technically, fields and real do not rhyme, but they do, right? And they make it work. So by utilizing songs that have similar vowel sounds, you can get away with it. And what that allows you to do is that allows you to be a little more expressive with what you're trying to say. Because if you're just locked into every time you're going to say right, you got to follow it with fight or might or something like that, then you're locked into what you're trying to express. But if you start looking at what are some other options that aren't literal rhymes, but the vowel sounds are the same, then that opens up what you can use and what you're trying to say. I think probably one of my favorite ones in the Scenes from Italian Restaurant is later on when he goes when he was talking about the Brent and Eddie had it already by the summer of 75. And then he says they couldn't go back to the greasers. The best they could do is pick up their pieces. Okay, greasers and pieces does not even remotely rhyme, but the rhythm of it, because it's like they couldn't go back to the greasers. The best they could do is pick up their pieces, and it's going by real fast. The grease and the piece works, and it's going, and because the rhythm of it, it sounds cool and it works, and you're not going, well, that doesn't rhyme. What's he doing, right? So he's able to make that work in that song. There are a lot of very interesting, because if you listen to that, he's got all of those internal rhymes too, right? They got in a apartment with deep hot carpet and a couple of things, right? So rhyme, and then another rhyme that's going to rhyme with the next verse, So he's got all of those rhymes too, and so it's a lot of really interesting stuff. But I don't want to go into detail about this because I don't want somebody seeing this and getting upset at me. But I went to a local songwriting circle. And there was a guy, and he was very new at songwriting, and he wrote this song, and he had and he was using a very literal rhyme in there, and because of that, he was he ended up sort of, and again, I don't want to go into what he said in the song because I don't want him seeing this online and being like oh, he's talking bad about me or whatever. But what I saw in there was that he was talking about this, like I think it was like being in a relationship with somebody or whatever, and then there was one line that made it sound like this was a bad thing, right? But it was there because it rhymed with with the title of his song. And I was like, he felt like he had to include that because it rhymed with that, but it doesn't really fit because everything else is very positive, and he's got this one line basically saying this is a bad thing. It didn't make any sense. And so I think he only did that because it was that literal rhyme. And I think that there were a lot of other things that he could have put in that place, right? If that makes sense. So
Yeah.
if we start opening up what we're doing as far as the rhyme goes, and you know, it also should be said, one of the most interesting things to me, and you know, when we go back and we listen to historically, if we listen to like operas and things like that, they don't bother rhyming the stuff. There's no rhyme scheme to it. A lot of times, you know, with Monteverdi, you know, when they were writing that, there's not really a big rhyme scheme to what they're doing or anything. That's a more in popular music kind of thing that's happening. I mean, the idea's been around for a long time, but it's more of that. But one of the really interesting things to me, getting back to melody and music and the words running together, the song "Sugar We're Going Down," Fall Out Boy, right? Huge hit, right? The verses do not have a single rhyme in them at all, not one. Now the choruses do, right? But the verses melodically moving all over the place, not a single rhyme in anywhere in
I
either
can't
one.
even remember the verse.
It starts
Yeah.
with am I more than you bargained for yet? I've been trying to tell you anything you want, right?
Oh
Not
yeah.
a single rhyme anywhere. Huge hit, right? But the melody's moving all over the place, so it's making it interesting, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, so go back and listen to that one. You'll hear what I'm talking about. So
That's
you
funny.
locked into that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that story you told. I actually think back to when I was like starting writing songs at 15, and I also fell into that trap thinking, oh, everything's got to rhyme really well.
Yeah.
But then you end up writing kind of silly lyrics that don't actually help the
Yeah.
song out.
That's
But
right.
nowadays, like what you're saying with these kind of like vowel sound rhymes, like you're so true. And the listener doesn't even notice that they're not perfect rhymes. I don't think they
Yeah.
feel like they rhyme because they have the same vowel sound. And you can do so much more with a lyric that way.
Yeah. And one of the things that I learned from Neil Peart of Rush is that in listening to his stuff, when you listen to Neil's lyrics, he uses a lot of words that end with a shun sound, a TION or SHUN sound.
Oh yeah.
So fruition, ignition, remission, admission, right? There's
Tons of shot words.
there's billions of those.
Yeah.
Billions of those, right? He can use 5 of those in every song that he wrote and never repeat himself, right? There's tons of them. And so that's another thing to do.